Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and get you the core insights from key sources. Today, we're diving into something pretty fundamental: how the language you speak actually structures the reality you perceive. It's all about that deep connection between language and, well, cognition. I want to kick off with this really evocative idea from our source material, this quote: "All objects, all phases of culture are alive. They have voices." Now, if that's true, then language is kind of like the filter, deciding which voices we hear, how we sort them. Our mission today is to unpack how the words and grammar we learn shape our mental templates for seeing the world.
Exactly. And this brings us straight to the Whorfian Hypothesis, sometimes called the relativity principle. The central idea is that the structures inherent in a language, the rules you have to follow, they predispose native speakers to focus on certain concepts. Maybe it's shape, maybe time, maybe number, as essential organizing frameworks for reality.
Okay, but predispose, does that mean we're sort of linguistic prisoners?
Mm.
Like, if my language doesn't have a word for something, I literally can't think about it.
Ugh. That's a really common misconception, and it's crucial to clarify. The Whorfian hypothesis, well, it points out a paradox. Yes, language is definitely a specific, culturally built tool for making sense of the world, a set of filters, if you like, but it doesn't mean we're trapped. Not at all. We can always explain things differently, paraphrase, learn new words.
Right.
Language is flexible enough for us to communicate across cultures, but our default way of thinking, the sort of automatic pilot, is heavily guided by those linguistic categories we pick up first. Think of it as a guide, maybe a strong suggestion, rather than a prison wall.
Right, a guide, not a prison. Got it.
Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning then. How does this guidance even start? It seems to begin with language acting as a kind of sorting tool, right?
Yeah.
A classificatory device.
Oh, absolutely. It goes back to the early giants of anthropology, specifically Franz Boas and his work with American Aboriginal languages. He really established this idea that languages function primarily as classificatory devices. They help a culture grapple with its specific environment, its social realities. The classic example, though maybe a bit simplified sometimes, is the vocabulary for seals in certain Eskimo languages.
Right. In English, we mostly just have seal.
Yeah.
Baby seal.
It's exactly. But imagine your survival depends heavily on seals. You need more precision. So they might not just have one general word. There could be a specific term for a seal basking in the sun, perhaps another for one floating on ice, maybe a third for one swimming nearby.
Why? Because where it is and what it's doing changes how you hunt it.
Precisely. The seal's state dictates the whole strategy.
That it makes so much sense. It directly connects specialized words to cultural need. And you see this happening all the time, right? Think about all the terms we invented for digital tech, iPod, iPhone, tablet, laptop, ultra-portable. We needed those words. But then think about typewriters. All that specific vocabulary, carriage return, Platen, ribbon spool, it's just disappearing because the need disappeared. Our vocabulary really does mirror what our society cares about.
And this isn't just a modern thing, it's global. Look at the Nuer people in Sudan. Cattle are absolutely central to their life socially, economically, religiously. So they have this incredibly detailed vocabulary just for cattle, describing everything: age, sex, color, even how the horns are shaped.
Wow.
Or think about Europe, where historically fashion and painting were culturally significant. That led to really extensive vocabularies for colors.
Okay, so naming things matters for practical reasons.
Yeah.
But what about the cognitive side? What actually happens in our heads when we assign a name? That seems really key.
It is key. It's the act of differentiation itself. When a culture comes up with the word cat, it's not just pointing at an animal. It's conceptually separating cat from everything that is not cat. This act forces us to pay attention to certain features, whiskers, claws, the way it moves, and that naturally leads us to create broader categories, like the superordinate concept feline.
And then from feline, we can go down to subordinate concepts: Siamese, Persian, tabby, whatever. So classification is layered, and we basically stop making distinctions when they stop being useful for the culture.
Exactly right. And this whole process marks a huge shift from how an infant experiences the world, purely sensory, grasping, tasting, to conceptual knowing. Words start to stand in for that raw sensory data. Take blue. It starts as a concrete thing, the color of the sky, the sea.
Sure.
But culturally, English speakers have stretched that concept way out. We talk about having the blues, which links to music history, or something happening out of the blue, which probably relates to, unexpected weather. The word takes the basic sense experience and builds it into a cultural idea.
Okay, so nouns and cultural categories shape our world. But what about the grammar itself, the underlying structure of sentences? Does that impose an even deeper, maybe more unconscious template? Let's talk about those Whorfian effects tied to grammar.
Yes, this is where the hypothesis arguably gets its real power. Let's take something simple, like prepositions. In English, we say information is in a newspaper. We conceptualize the newspaper as a container.
Right, so we say, I got a lot out of the newspaper. It makes perfect sense to us.
We don't think twice. But Italian speakers typically use the preposition su, which means on. This implies the information is, like, printed on the surface. Because of that subtle grammatical difference, translating the English phrase, there was nothing in it, literally into Italian. It just sounds weird, nonsensical even. The grammar is setting up the basic spatial logic.
So the grammar is sort of unconsciously correcting how we perceive things. It reminds me of that classic psychology experiment, the Gestalt one from way back in 1932. Carmichael, Hogan, and Walter showed how labels affect drawings.
Oh, that's a perfect example. It's such strong evidence. They showed people this ambiguous drawing, basically two circles linked by a line. Half the people were told the label was eyeglasses. The other half heard dumbbells.
Oh.
And when they were asked to draw it later from memory, the results were dramatically different. The eyeglasses group drew it thinner, maybe added curves. The dumbbells group made it thicker, more solid. The word, the label, acted like a filter. It fundamentally conditioned how they saw and remembered that simple shape.
Wow. So if just one word can change how we remember a drawing,
Yeah.
imagine the effect of entirely different grammatical systems.
Exactly. And we see this in comparative studies. John Lucy's work comparing English and Yucatec Mayan is a great example. English grammar forces us to mark plurals for count nouns. You have to say 3 sticks. You can't say 3 stick.
Okay.
Yucatec, though, only makes number distinctions obligatory for animate things, people, animals.
So how did that play out? How did it affect how they saw things?
Well, Lucy showed both groups these complex scenes, like a village setting. He found that the English speakers, because their grammar demands it, tended to recall the scene by focusing on the number of countable objects, sticks, stones, etc. But they weren't so focused on the quantity of substances, like a pile of sugar.
And the Yucatec speakers.
They did the opposite. Guided by their grammar, they focused their recall on the number of people or animals present, the animate beings. The grammar literally shaped what aspects of reality they felt compelled to notice and remember.
The vocabulary differences can be really stark, too. I'm thinking about the Navajo language example. Apparently, they have something like 100 different words just for lines and geometric shapes.
That's right. It's incredibly sophisticated. They have specific words like adzisigai for something like parallel white lines running off into the distance. This kind of precision tells you that geometry, shape, spatial arrangement must have a really high cultural value for them. It even shows up in their place names, their toponyms.
That makes me think about how we handle something abstract like time. In English, we rely so heavily on spatial metaphors. The future lies ahead. The past is behind us. We talk about moving through time.
It feels completely natural to us, but it's not universal. If you look at ancient Greek speakers, their perception seems to have been the reverse. For them, the past was in front because it was known, visible, already happened. The future was behind them, unknown, unseen.
So they saw themselves standing still, and time was flowing towards them from behind.
Kind of, yeah. It's a totally different orientation to time built right into their language, a completely different worldview.
That is a fundamental difference. And Whorf's famous work with the Hopi language, that took this idea of time even further, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He was fascinated by how their language dealt with time. Hopi doesn't really form plurals for time units in the same way we do. They wouldn't say 10 days, as if days were countable objects you could pile up. Time for them is more cyclical, an ongoing process, not something you can measure and cut into pieces.
And their verbs were different, too.
Critically different. Hopi verbs often incorporate what are called validity forms. This means the verb itself has to show whether the speaker is reporting a known fact, just anticipating something, or maybe speaking from general experience.
Wait, so their grammar forces them to basically state their source or certainty level every time they talk about something?
Pretty much. And they also use aspectual forms, which indicate the duration or the state of an action is ongoing, just starting, completed. All these grammatical requirements reflect a philosophical outlook that's much less dependent on things like clocks and calendars because the nuances of time and certainty are woven right into the language structure.
And we saw a practical example of this linguistic influence in that study. comparing Navajo-speaking kids and Ingo-speaking kids when they had to sort objects.
Yes, that's another compelling piece of evidence. Because Navajo grammar has obligatory categories related to the shape of an object when you talk about handling it, the Navajo children, when asked to group items, tended to pair, say, a blue rope with a yellow rope they grouped by shape.
Whereas the English-speaking kids,
their language emphasizes color more readily in simple descriptions, so they almost always paired the blue rope with a blue stick grouping by color. The language's built-in categories guided a completely non-linguistic task.
Okay, this naturally leads us into ethnosemantics, which, as I understand it, is the study of these meaning systems, specifically looking at their cultural implications. Kinship terms seem like the classic example here.
They're a perfect illustration of how classification reflects social structure. In Shinswani, for instance, the word mama is used for both the biological mother and the mother's sister, the aunt. Why? Because culturally, they often share similar nurturing roles.
Okay.
Or in Italian, the word nipote covers nephew, niece, and grandchild relationships. English keeps strictly separate across generations.
And the contrast between the Hawaiian and Sudanese systems sounds pretty extreme.
It really shows the range. The Hawaiian system is very generational. Basically, all relatives of the same generation and the same sex get the same term. So your father, your father's brother, and your mother's brother might all be called by the same kinship term. It simplifies things within a generation.
And Sudanese.
The opposite end of the spectrum. It's incredibly precise, highly descriptive. They have distinct terms for practically every type of cousin, tracking lineage very specifically.
When we talk classification, though,
Yep.
color terms, that's always been a big battleground for the whole linguistic relativity idea, hasn't it? English basically carves up the spectrum into 6 main colors.
Right. Purple, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. But we know this isn't the only way. The Shona language in Africa, for example, uses only 4 main categories. And Bassa in Liberia uses just 2. Hui, for darker cool colors like black, blue, green, and Ziza, for lighter warm colors like white, yellow, orange.
Which really seems to support the idea that color categories are a reflex of vocabulary, not just a direct mapping of what our eyes see.
Right.
What one culture sees as 2 colors, another lumps together.
Exactly. But then this observation led to a huge counter-movement, really culminating in that massive Berlin and Kay study back in 1969. They were looking for universals in color naming.
What did they find?
They studied nearly 100 languages and claimed they found 11 universal focal points, specific shades, representing black, white, red, green, yellow, blue, etc. They even proposed a kind of evolutionary sequence. If a language only has 3 basic color terms, that third term will always be red.
So they were arguing that perception drives language, not the other way around. A direct challenge to Whorf.
It certainly was. It suggested that color naming follows universal patterns based on how humans perceive color, which seemed to weaken the strong Whorfian claim.
So how did anthropologists and linguists sort this out? We have one side saying language shapes perception, the other saying perception shapes language.
Well, the consensus view now is more nuanced. Critics pointed out, perhaps rightly, that Berlin and Kay might have been influenced by their own English categories when conducting the research. Plus, there are exceptions. Russian, for example, treats light blue, goluboy, and dark blue, singly, as distinct basic colors in a way English doesn't. And then crucial studies like Eleanor Roche's work with the Dani people in New Guinea, who only have terms roughly equivalent to dark and light, showed that even though they lacked the words, they could still perceive and remember the focal colors just as well as English speakers when tested non-linguistically.
Okay, so the modern understanding is more like our basic physical perception of color might be universal or close to it, but language acts as a powerful guide. It directs our attention and makes certain distinctions easier to remember or talk about.
That's a great summary. Language guides attention and categorization, even if it doesn't fundamentally alter raw perception. And ethnosemantics uses specific methods to map these guides. One is opposition. This involves figuring out a word's meaning by seeing what it contrasts with, and importantly, where those contrasts don't neatly apply across cultures. Think about testing good versus evil in different value systems.
Okay, testing the boundaries. And the other method, componential analysis. Sounds a bit technical.
It sounds more complex than it is. It's basically a systematic way to break down a word's meaning into its core semantic features. Take father. You could analyze it as having features like plus animate, plus human, plus adult, plus male. By comparing these feature sets, these components, across related words or across languages, you can precisely map out which distinctions matter culturally. This helps researchers understand lexical fields, like all the specialized words English has for things you sit on: chair, stool, bench, couch, sofa. Each one differs slightly in its features, like plus has back, plus upholstered, plus seats multiple people, revealing cultural nuances about furniture function.
Right. So bringing this all together for our listeners, what's the main takeaway about language and how we think?
I think the core message is that the specific needs, the history, and the classification systems that matter to a culture inevitably get embedded in its language, particularly in its vocabulary and grammar. These linguistic categories then become powerful, often unconscious, guides for how you perceive the world, organize time, understand social roles. Language and cognition are just fundamentally intertwined. You can't really separate them. They're two sides of the same coin.
And it's worth stressing again that the Whorfian idea isn't that you're locked in a linguistic cage. It's more that your native language provides the default settings, the primary toolkit for navigating everyday life. It's the operating system you learn first, but you can always install new apps, learn new ways of thinking. So as you go about your day after listening to this, here's something provocative to consider, drawn from Whorf's own experience. He worked in fire insurance and noticed that workers were often careless around gasoline drums labeled empty. Why? Because the word empty suggested no danger, overriding their direct perception that empty drums still contained highly flammable vapor.
A powerful real-world example.
It makes you wonder, how often do the labels we use, big ones like freedom or justice, or simple ones like empty, actually shape our actions by overriding what we might otherwise perceive directly? How often do words obscure the reality, the danger, or maybe even the beauty right in front of us? Definitely something to chew on.
Indeed. And on that note, that wraps up our deep dive today into language, relativity, and cognition. Thanks so much for joining us. The Last Minute Lexa team hopes this synthesis of your source material helps you quickly grasp these crucial concepts and how language truly guides our thoughts.